Imagine waking up one morning in a small medieval village. The crops are failing. A child has fallen mysteriously ill. A storm has destroyed half the harvest. People are frightened, desperate for answers, and someone needs to be blamed.
He talks to animals. She knows strange herbs. Didn't her neighbor die after an argument?
Within weeks, a person who had lived peacefully among their neighbors for years could find themselves accused of witchcraft. Today, the witch hunts are often remembered as one of the darkest chapters in European history. They are surrounded by myths and images of endless bonfires. And all those horrible events were caused by fear. The reasons behind the witch hunts. To understand why witch hunts happened, we first need to understand the medieval mindset. Life in medieval Europe was difficult and unpredictable. Disease could sweep through entire towns without warning. Harvests could fail because of bad weather. Livestock could die overnight. There was no modern medicine, no understanding of bacteria or viruses, and little ability to explain natural disasters. When terrible things happened, people searched for causes. Many believed the world was a battleground between God and the devil. Evil forces were thought to be constantly working against humanity. Demons and supernatural dangers were considered as real as storms or wolves. In such a world, the idea of witchcraft seemed completely plausible. A witch was not merely someone who performed magic. According to popular belief, witches made pacts with the devil, used supernatural powers to harm others, ruined crops, caused illness, and even controlled the weather. What sounds unbelievable today often seemed perfectly logical to people living hundreds of years ago. Time of the witches. The most intense period of witch hunting occurred between roughly 1450 and 1750, spanning the late medieval period and the early modern era. The worst outbreaks happened during a time when Europe was undergoing enormous change. Religious conflicts divided societies. Wars devastated populations. Economic hardship created uncertainty. New ideas challenged old beliefs. Instead of reducing fear, these upheavals often intensified it. Historians believe that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe during this period. Tens of thousands more were accused, imprisoned, tortured, or otherwise socially destroyed. Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. The book, which was published in 1487, became one of the most infamous texts in European history. It was called Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. Written by the German Inquisitor Heinrich Kramer, the book claimed to explain how witches served the devil, and how authorities could identify and prosecute them. The book described elaborate conspiracies involving witches gathering at secret meetings, making pacts with demons, and committing supernatural crimes. Many of its claims were based on superstition, rumor, and religious paranoia rather than evidence. One of its core ideas was that witchcraft was difficult to detect directly, so investigators had to rely on indirect signs and behavior. In practice, this meant that almost any difference from what was seen as normal could be treated as evidence. A famous example was the idea of the witch's mark. This could be something completely ordinary, like a mole, scar, or birthmark. If it was found, it was seen as proof of a pact with the devil. If nothing unusual was found, that didn't mean innocence. The devil may simply be hiding the mark. Either way, the suspicion remained. The book also encouraged judging people based on behavior. Being too quiet, too emotional, or even too calm during accusations could all be seen as signs of guilt. Likewise, if a person was disliked in the community or had conflicts with neighbors, that social tension could be reframed as evidence of witchcraft. This way of thinking also justified harsh physical interrogation and torture, meant to prove innocence. People could be deprived of sleep, kept in painful positions, or physically abused until they admitted to crimes they often could not have committed. Because any confession was seen as confirmation of guilt, torture didn't really uncover truth, it often just produced the answer investigators were already expecting. Perhaps most importantly, the Malleus Maleficarum encouraged the belief that witches were secret, organized, and deceptive, meaning they would always try to hide their crimes. This assumption created a closed system of reasoning, denial became proof of guilt, and confession, often obtained under pressure, was treated as confirmation of truth. Unfortunately for witches, due to the relatively recent invention of the printing press, the book became widely circulated throughout Europe and served as an instruction manual. Who was accused? Popular culture often portrays witch trials as targeting only old women living alone in the woods. The reality was more complicated. Many victims were widows, healers, midwives, or socially vulnerable individuals. Others were simply unlucky enough to be involved in local disputes. Disputes over property, a failed business deal, or a personal grudge could also escalate into accusations of witchcraft. Moreover, if you were born with red hair in the 15th century, you were very unlucky. This fiery hair color, which is found in less than 2% of the world's population, has for centuries been a source of fear. Redheads were considered witches because of their uniqueness and their difference from most people. Their bright hair color was associated with the flames of hell. Such people were thought to be the spawn of evil spirits or vampires. In some communities, accusations spread almost like an epidemic. Once suspicion entered a village, people began reinterpreting ordinary events through a supernatural lens. A cow dies, a child falls ill, a storm destroys the harvest. Someone recalls a quarrel that took place several months earlier. And suddenly, your neighbor seems to be to blame and is accused of witchcraft. Life in those days was like a lottery, or even Russian roulette. Today you live a peaceful life, and tomorrow you are accused of being a witch and burned alive at the stake. Not every region allowed torture, and legal procedures varied across Europe. However, in many areas, torture became a central part of witch investigations. The results were predictable. People confessed to impossible crimes. They claimed to fly through the night sky. They admitted to attending secret gatherings with demons. Some described transforming into animals. Others confessed to causing storms or disease through magic. Under extreme physical and psychological pressure, people often said whatever interrogators wanted to hear. The tragedy didn't end with a single confession. Under pressure, many accused people didn't just admit to witchcraft, they were also forced to name other witches. Once a name was mentioned, that person would often be arrested too. This created a chain reaction. One accusation led to another, and then another. Even people who had nothing to do with each other suddenly became part of the same supposed network. As a result, a single trial could quickly spread through an entire village, triggering dozens of new arrests and accusations. The nightmare of Trier. One of the most devastating witch hunts occurred in the German city of Trier during the late 16th century. The persecutions became so widespread that judges, city officials, priests, and wealthy citizens were accused of witchcraft. No social class was safe. According to contemporary accounts, entire villages were left nearly empty after repeated arrests and executions. The panic reached a point where the machinery of accusation seemed almost unstoppable. Once fear gained momentum, even powerful people struggled to protect themselves. The Salem Trials. No discussion of witch hunts would be complete without mentioning the Salem witch trials. Although they occurred in colonial America rather than medieval Europe, Salem remains one of history's most famous examples of mass hysteria. In 1692, a group of young girls in Massachusetts began displaying unusual behavior. Local authorities concluded that witchcraft might be responsible. Accusations spread rapidly. Neighbors accused neighbors. Friends accused friends. Even respected members of the community came under suspicion. By the end of the crisis, more than 200 people had been accused, and 20 were executed. The Salem trials demonstrated how quickly fear, social tension, and flawed investigations could combine to produce disaster. End of the witch hunts. By the late 17th and 18th centuries, attitudes gradually began to change. The growth of scientific thinking encouraged people to seek natural explanations for events once attributed to magic. Legal systems became more skeptical of unreliable testimony. Courts demanded stronger evidence. Intellectual movements such as the Enlightenment promoted reason and critical inquiry. The same accusations that once seemed convincing increasingly appeared absurd. Witch trials became less common and eventually disappeared from most of Europe. The Swiss-made Anna Goldie is considered to be Europe's last witch. She was executed on the 13th of June, 1782 in the town of Glarus, Switzerland. A dark mirror of human nature. The history of witch hunts is not merely a story about superstition. This is a story about what happens when fear takes over reason. A failed harvest. A personal feud. A rumor. A frightened community searching for someone to blame. That combination proved deadly. The victims were rarely powerful sorcerers plotting in secret. In most cases, the witches were ordinary people who found themselves in uncommon circumstances. The witch hunts remind us how easily societies can convince themselves that invisible enemies are everywhere, and how dangerous it becomes when suspicion is treated as evidence. The bonfires have long since gone out, and witch trials are a thing of the past, dating back centuries. Yet a deeper lesson remains relevant today. Fear can spread faster than facts, and once a society starts looking for scapegoats, almost anyone could become the next victim of witchcraft accusations.